Sometime between 1971 and 1985, recorded burglary in Britain tripled, not doubled, tripled. And yet, the vast majority of British homes had no alarm system, no monitoring contract, no CCTV camera above the front door, not even a particularly strong lock on the back entry. What they had instead was something that never appeared in a catalogue and never required a monthly payment. The generation that grew up in terraced backstreets, in council estates, in close-packed post-war housing had developed a set of home security habits so effective that most of them worked without anyone outside the household ever knowing they were there. Some cost sixpence, some cost nothing at all. A few are so obvious you'll wonder why the modern security industry never mentions them. They don't mention them because there's no money in it. These are 20 of the best. Number 20, property marking. Long before smart water and UV security pens, British families marked their belongings with something more direct, a steel engraving tool and their postcode. Police had been recommending property marking since the 1960s. West Midlands Police ran one of the first formal campaigns in the early 1970s, distributing leaflets through post offices, libraries, and council offices. The principle was elementary. If your television, your camera, your portable radio has your postcode and house number scratched into the casing, a fence can't sell it. A pawnbroker won't touch it. The engraving tool cost less than £1. The postcode system rolled out across Britain between 1959 and 1974, and property marking went with it almost immediately. Police leaflets of the period showed exactly where to mark common household items, underneath the television, on the back panel of the radio, inside the lid of the record player. Number 19. The sash window pin. Every terraced house in Britain had sash windows. And sash windows, as any opportunist burglar of the era understood, could be opened from outside with a knife blade or a thin piece of card passed through the meeting rail gap. The fix cost 4p. A 4-inch steel nail or a proper sash stop from the hardware shop dropped vertically into a small hole drilled through the inner sash frame and partway into the outer frame. The window could not be raised from outside without first withdrawing the pin from inside the room. No tool a burglar carried could reach it. The small clunk as the pin dropped into its hole, that solid little sound, was the window saying it wasn't going anywhere. Hardware shops stocked purpose-made sash stops for next to nothing. A nail from the shed worked identically. The modern equivalent is sold through DIY chains at prices starting around £8 per unit. Number 18. The letterbox cover. The letterbox is a hole in your front door. The typical fitting was a slot wide enough to receive a rolled newspaper, and wide enough to admit a straightened wire coat hanger. Fishing was a documented and practiced method of entry. A bent wire through the slot, a key visible on a hook or left on the hall table, and a burglar who hadn't had to force or pick anything. He simply reached through and lifted. The fix was an inner draft excluder with a bristle or rubber inner flap, available from any hardware shop, sometimes fitted free of charge by council maintenance workers during the 1970s energy-saving programs. It also kept the hall considerably warmer through winter. One piece of rubber, 2 problems solved. There was a woman up our street, Mrs. Pearson, lovely woman, who kept her door key on a hook just inside the letterbox. For years. Nobody would bother, she used to say. One afternoon in November 1972, someone bothered. 12 minutes and they were gone. She had a brush excluder fitted the next morning. Number 17. Radio 4 on low. A house that sounds occupied is not worth attempting. BBC Radio 4 saw before September 1967 BBC Home Service turned low behind a closed front room door. Voices, without the words necessarily being audible, created the impression of presence. It cost nothing beyond the electricity already being used. The radio was on because someone had been listening. You left it running when you went to the shops. The rule that experienced households observed: speech radio, not music. Music playing from an empty room sounds like a radio left on. Speech, the cadences of a program, a newsreader's voice carrying through a closed door, muffled enough that you can't make out the words but clear enough to sound like someone is home. Sounds like people. Number 16. The timer plug. Where Radio 4 addressed the sound of an occupied house, the mechanical timer plug addressed the visual evidence of one. Timer plugs, the Sangamo, the Venner, the early master plug, were on hardware shop shelves by the early 1970s. A rotating dial with push-in pins set the on and off times. Plugged a standard lamp into it, set it to activate at dusk and switch off at 11, and any watching eye from the street saw a lit window at the hours a normal household would be awake. They cost approximately £2.50 in 1975, used year after year with no degradation. They were sold in the same aisle as fuses and extension cables, routine household items, not security products. Pause here because something is worth saying. Every item so far costs less than the monthly standing charge of the cheapest alarm monitoring contract currently available in Britain. That is not a coincidence. It is the point. The generation that lived through the Depression and the Second World War came to home security the way they came to everything else. Use what you have, don't spend what you haven't got, and make it work without complaint. The industry in Britain did not exist in any meaningful commercial form until the early 1980s. And yet families were protecting their homes throughout the 1960s and 70s when the burglary rate was rising sharply. They were doing it with observation, practical hardware, and a density of neighbourly awareness that no monthly subscription has ever replicated. The 15 items are where the real knowledge lives. Number 15. The visible lock. Here is the counterintuitive one. The lock fitted to a window or a back gate does not need to be strong. It needs to be visible. Burglary in Britain has always been, and remains, overwhelmingly opportunist. The person looking for a way in is not planning a sophisticated operation. He is looking at 3 or 4 houses and assessing which offers the least resistance. A visible window lock, even a cheap and technically inadequate one, alters that calculation. To the next street. The modern alarm company charges you separately for the warning sign in the garden and the sticker on the window, understanding perfectly well that the sign does work, that the technology behind it does not. Your grandparents understood this and declined to pay for it. Stick with me to number 7, where I reach the part of British home security that no alarm company has ever managed to package and sell. Number 14. The milk bottle signal. By the mid-1970s, the vast majority of British homes received fresh milk by doorstep delivery, yet the UK had the highest rate in the world. The milkman arrived between 5 and 6 in the morning. 2 full pints sitting undisturbed by mid-morning was a signal understood by anyone who cared to read it. Nobody had been home to bring them in. Working-class households going away for even a single night did not simply cancel the delivery. They told the milkman directly on his morning round in person. He kept an eye. If something looked wrong, he passed the word to whoever was reliably at home during the day. The milkman's round was fixed year after year. He knew every doorstep on his route, and he knew when something was different. That passed freely to the people who needed it. Number 13. Thorny hedges, pyracantha, hawthorn, berberis, holly. The reason your grandparents' front boundary had a hedge with inch-long thorns was not purely a matter of horticulture. A thorny hedge along a property boundary is a physical barrier that requires protective clothing to cross without injury. It tears fabric. It catches and holds. It makes noise when disturbed. It draws blood. In the security design, it is a delay measure. It does not prevent entry, but it increases the cost of entry sufficiently that the opportunist prefers an easier target. Pyracantha was cheap, established quickly, required minimal maintenance, and was formidable once mature. Cost per metre of hedging plant in 1972, £4 shillings. The modern prickly strip sold in builders' merchants achieves the same effect at considerably greater expense. Number 12. Broken glass on walls. This practice has acquired an unfortunate reputation, largely from health and safety discussions that gathered force in the 1980s. For much of the 20th century, embedding broken glass into the cement capping of a garden wall was a standard element of British domestic security. Milk bottles were the most common source. The glass was free, available in volume, and its irregular fractured edges were effective at discouraging anyone from climbing over. It remains technically legal in Britain today with appropriate warning signage. You can still see it on older boundary walls in many northern towns. A grey cement cap set with glittering fragments, installed in the late 1950s or early 1960s and never replaced because it has never needed to be. Number 11. The door chain. The door chain does not keep anyone out. A determined intruder with a shoulder will break a standard door chain in a single shove. That is not its function. A door chain allows you to open your front door approximately 4 inches to whoever has knocked, establish who they are and what they want, and decide whether to admit them without being pushed through your own doorway. British working-class households fitted door chains as standard. Children were instructed. before they were old enough to answer the door unsupervised. Chain on first, then open. Never the other way round. The sequence was drilled until it became reflex. The principle is the same one underpinning every digital two-factor authentication system built in the last 25 years. Verify identity through a restricted channel before granting full access. Your grandmother had this one in place before the computer scientists thought of it. If you've grown up in Britain, several of these will feel familiar without your being able to say exactly where you learned them. Not from a book, from the way your street worked, from what your parents did without explanation, because their parents had done it before them. If this is the kind of practical, forgotten British knowledge you want more of, consider subscribing. New videos every week. Now, back to the list. Number 10. Backgate bolts. In the terraced housing that ran across most of northern England, the Midlands and much of Wales and Scotland, access to the rear of the house came through the back lane. The back lane was the coal deliveryman's route, the dustbin men's route, and, for opportunist burglars, the preferred approach. A gate that could be lifted off its hinges or pushed past a single bolt gave access to a rear yard entirely hidden from the street. The fix: 2 bolts on the inside of the back gate. One at the top, one at the bottom, both drawn. A gate secure 2 points requires the bolts to be broken or the gate destroyed. Neither is silent, neither is fast. The opportunist required both. Number 9. Yale versus mortise. The lock your insurer actually required. A Yale spring latch, the type fitted as standard to most British front doors through the mid-20th century, can be slipped with a credit card in roughly 3 seconds. This was known, and yet through the 1960s and into the 1970s, millions of British homes relied on a Yale alone. The correct answer was a 5-lever mortise deadlock, a lock that throws a solid steel bolt into the door frame, requiring the correct key to retract it and which cannot be slipped or shimmed. British Standard BS 3621, in force since the early 1960s, has codified the specification these locks had to meet. By the early 1980s, most home insurers required BS 36 condition of cover. The combination, Yale for convenience, mortise for actual security, was what locksmiths and hardware shop men had been recommending for years. The public learned it through the burglary wave of the 1970s. Number 8. The coal hole cover. In the older terraced housing of the North and Midlands, coal arrived through a small iron cover set into the pavement or front wall at street level. Beneath it was a chute dropping into a cellar from which fuel was brought into the house as needed. When coal heating gave way to gas and electric through the 1960s and 70s, deliveries stopped. What didn't stop was the cover. The cover was a ground-level, iron-framed opening into the front of the property with, in most cases, no interior fastening whatsoever. Nobody had added a bolt when deliveries stopped because nobody had thought to. Families who considered the matter fitted a simple interior bolt or wedged timber against the frame. Families who didn't had left a door unlocked at the base of the house. If you're finding things here you haven't thought about in years, a thumbs up costs you nothing and helps me keep making these. Thank you. Number 7. A torch by the bed. This one isn't about preventing a break-in. It's about what you do if one is underway. A torch on the bedside table. Not a weapon. Just a torch. If you hear something in the morning, the instinct is to go downstairs in darkness. The experienced view contrary. Go to the bedroom window first. Switch on the bedroom light. You are now visible from outside. Shine the torch into the garden. This does 3 things simultaneously. It tells any garden that the house is awake, it signals to any watching neighbour that something has disturbed you, and it creates witnesses. In the majority of cases, there's nothing there. In the minority, the appearance of light and movement at an upstairs window is enough. The torch also served during power cuts when a fuse blew and for nighttime visits to the outside lavatory in older properties. 1 purchase. 4 uses. Don't go ahead. Number 1 is the no alarm company can package, no app can replicate, and that cost nothing then and costs nothing now. Number 6. Trusted neighbour with a key. Before digital safes and remote access smart locks, the answer to "what if something goes wrong while I'm away" was a conversation and a spare key, not given to any neighbour. Given to the right one, the one who was home most reliably, awake by 6, and who had lived next door long enough that trust required no discussion. The arrangement was real. You held their key, they held yours. In streets where people had lived side by side for 20 or 30 years, This was the baseline condition of living there. The modern key safe performs the access function. It does not perform the function of a neighbour who notices at 9:10 on a Tuesday morning that your curtains haven't moved. Number 5. The Coleman knew every backyard. The Coleman's round was the same route, the same sequence, every week for decades. He knew every back gate on his circuit. He knew which were habitually open and which were always bolted. He knew which yards kept dogs, which households had elderly residents, and when something in the pattern was different from every other week, he had delivered there. Tradespeople who worked fixed residential rounds, Coleman, milkman, the bread van, the Corona lorry, formed between them an informal observation network of remarkable density. They were not employed for any surveillance purpose. They passed information because the community they served was their community too. There is no functional equivalent today. The rounds that created the network are gone and the network went with them. Number 4. The pub landlord network. In any working-class area of a British town in the 1960s or 70s, the landlord of the local pub knew something that no police constable could easily replicate: a comprehensive and current knowledge of who belonged and who did not. Every face was a known quantity to the man behind the bar. New faces were noticed, and in the week before a string of burglaries on nearby streets, a new face who had nursed a single half for 2 hours and asked casually about which houses stood empty was information that moved rapidly through the informal channels only close communities maintain. It was not intelligence work. It was conversation, and the memory of conversation, and the awareness that certain questions from certain strangers meant something worth mentioning to the right person. My father used to say, "Something goes missing on our street. Ask Derek at the Shoulder of Mutton. He'll have seen whoever did it 2 nights before." Not because he was clever about it, just because he'd been behind that bar long enough that a wrong face stood out to him the way a wrong note stands out to a musician. Number 3. The dog. Not a guard dog. Not a trained protection animal. Not a breed purchased for the purpose. A dog that barked, a terrier, a mongrel. Something with sharp hearing and no patience for sounds that didn't belong to the household's normal nights. The deterrent value of an audible dog is substantial and consistently supported by every study that has examined what burglars actually avoid. A barking dog at 11 in the evening wakes the street. It eliminates the single condition the opportunist requires above all others: silence and unobserved time. The working-class dog was chosen for its breed or its size. It was chosen, or more often simply acquired and kept, for its noise. Number 2. Net curtains. People smile at net curtains now. They appear in the same cultural register as best china kept for visitors, the furniture of a past working-class respectability, slightly comic to anyone too young to remember it as the standard. The net curtain was a security technology. A net curtain in a front window allows the person inside to observe the street, while preventing anyone on the street from seeing clearly into the room. Curtain twitching, a phrase now used at mockery, was in practice a continuous, informal surveillance operation covering every close residential street in working-class Britain. Women who spent substantial hours at home with a net in the window knew every vehicle that used their street, every unfamiliar face, every change in the ordinary pattern of a Tuesday afternoon. Number 1. Neighbourhood watch. On a Tuesday in October 1982, in the village of Mollington, something that had existed informally in British working-class communities for the better part of a century, was given an official name and an orange sticker, the first formal neighbourhood watch scheme in the United Kingdom. Within 6 years, there were 42,000 registered schemes covering 2.5 million households. Home Office research showed burglary reductions of between 10 and 20% in active scheme areas. The orange eye sticker in a window was demonstrated to function as a genuine deterrent. But the founding of Neighbourhood Watch was not the introduction of something new. It was the recognition of something that had always existed, the agreement among people living in close proximity to pay attention, to notice when something was different, to say something when something seemed wrong. The communities that maintained this through the mid-20th century, the back-to-back terraces, the council estates where families had lived for 30 years, the streets where everyone knew everyone's name, had lower burglary rates than their material poverty would statistically predict. They were not lucky. They were watching. The orange sticker in the window, the torch on the bedside table, the dog at the foot of the stairs, the neighbour who noticed at 9:10 on a Tuesday morning that your curtains hadn't moved. None of it cost £30 a month. None of it required a contract. None of it generated revenue for anyone. That is precisely why you have never seen it advertised. If this is the kind of practical, forgotten British knowledge you want more of, subscribe. It costs you nothing and it tells us to keep going.